So when people are talking about the transition from being, let's say, a project manager to a senior project manager, whatever your title is, to being then an associate or principal in a firm, what's the difference there? It doesn't really mean hours. At some point in your career, when you're in leadership, it's no longer hours of a day or hours of a week. It takes what it takes. And so what our approach has always been is to give people the full picture of as much as we can, saying, this is likely what we have. This is the possibility of what we don't know. And we manage that uncertainty through just direct communication. But at the same time, giving straight answers. When you ask me what you think the foundation system is going to be, I'm going to tell you what I think it's going to be based on experience. What I'm not going to do is give you the Cheesecake Factory menu of alternatives.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Design Development, your hub to learn direct from top performers in real estate development, design, and construction. I'm your host, Renz Hayes, founding partner of H&O Lifelong Learner, and I am personally obsessed with high-powered organizations and the leaders that guide them. If this is your first time listening, thanks so much for joining us. And if you're a returning listener, can't thank you enough. Let's go. Joining us today is Boston staple Stan Sadkowski. He's a principal and head of the Boston office for GeoEngineers, which is a national earth science and geotechnical engineering company. Stan is just a great person, just a good human being you enjoy being around. He's got friends across the city. He provides so much value to his partners. The things that I wanted to share today from Stan's expertise is understanding how to evaluate and assess risk in the dirt. That's honestly, and especially in the greater Boston and other areas in the country, like the unknown below the dirt can make or break a development, and understanding how to evaluate that early and understand your risk without spending too much money before you have a real deal. That's the important part of geotechnical work early. Beyond that, GeoEngineers is a really cool company. They are employee owned, so we get to talk more about that and how it impacts your culture and changes the way people operate. It's really a great retention tool and just shares value across the company. So it's a 400 person plus firm. They have about 250 employee owners. So really compelling stuff. Let's get into my conversation with Stan Sadkowski. Please join me in welcoming Stan Sadkowski. Stan, thanks so much for joining us today. From everybody I know, no one has a bad thing to say about you, and I think you provide a ton of value out there for everyone that you work with. For those that don't know you from the greater Boston area, I'd love to give them a little bit of context. So could you share who is Stan, what you're about, and tell us a little bit about GeoEngineers?
High praise from you. We've known each other a long time, both from work and, just being friends in industry. So it's flattering to hear.
That's the best part, right? Making friends in the industry. I think that's the best part
that's
about
what
it.
I love too. What do we do? I think that's the hardest part of consulting, right? Is explaining what it is we do and what value we add. And geotechnical engineering is often given the, it can sometimes be minimized, but oftentimes is, one of the highest risks we have. And in real estate, your uncertainty in the ground is oftentimes your biggest risk. And so, our MO has always been to marry both geotech and environmental engineering. So you can kind of get all those things in one shot, right? So that when you're in a conference room talking to your teaming partners, you can get everything in one place. And the other thing is that we're also trying to do is that give you a straight answer, right? No, well, it could be this, it could be that. So much of engineering is experience, and conveying that experience to ease your team, your partnering, your teaming partners, and your end client, ease their concerns without alarming them, right? Without, an open checkbook, but just through experience, say, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And that kind of approach, I think is very good for teaming partners because it creates certainty in a very uncertain world, with, talking about below grade design. But it also, is pragmatic, and you say, okay, this is what we're going to go venture together with, and that's always been our approach. And I think that approach has worked.
Yeah, absolutely. You said a few things there. One, our goal really is to reduce risk. And as you pointed out, oftentimes in real estate development, there is the most risk is in the dirt. You can't see what's going on under the dirt. And your job is to try to expose that. There is a line that we have to walk, and I think you do this exceptionally well. And we're going to get into some more of the details later in the conversation. Our world, unfortunately, today is a very litigious world. So sometimes people and experts will take a step back and avoid providing their judgment when not all the variables are really established, because oftentimes you alluded to the experience it takes. But as a consultant, we really are being hired to share our judgment and our expertise so that the team can make better decisions. And if we just leave every single decision up to them because not all the variables are fixed because we're afraid of that litigious environment or being accountable, we're doing a disservice to the entire team.
You're spot on. I think we all have to be mindful of our risk, but we don't want to engineer based on our insurance policy, right? Like, yeah, if
well said.
If I'm going to be aggressive on a design, it's because it's informed, and you want to explain to clients, contractors, all the people you're working with, the pros and cons. But at the end of the day, you manage risk by getting good data. And
good data, judgment, data, leverage, all those things. GeoEngineers has such a cool phrase, and I think it speaks to this conversation. I love good branding, and there's nothing better than a good pun. Down to earth people and proven expertise.
Yeah, right. We have, when you look at our core values too, we're often defined as grit, right? So, yeah, also in a little play on words with the geoengineering world or the geotechnical world, right? Grit. But yeah, we are down to earth. I think we're a fun group to work with. We don't take ourselves too seriously. We treat people how we want to be treated, which in consulting is all you can ask for. It's a relationship based business, like all business. But yeah, we have a fun team here. We're a national group, as you know, but our work in Boston is focused, primarily, in and around 128. We go out further, of course, but most of our work with you and your team is, close by.
Yeah, urban development. Tell us a little bit. So GeoEngineers is a national company. Could you share a bit of that scale? And I know you were hired on, you're the principal of the Boston office, and you were tasked with growing that office over the last few years. So could you share how big is GeoEngineers offices, people, and what's going on in the Boston team?
So we stretch from, Seattle, which is our headquarters, to San Diego, Baton Rouge, Nashville, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Boston. And we have offices in between. So we're about 425, 450 people. And it's a good sized team.
Size,
it's, primarily engineers and scientists, right? In our Boston team, we have an office in Boston, right downtown, right outside of North Station. We have a team in Southborough, our Metro West team. And between the two groups, we're about 50 people. Our Boston team is about 30 or 32 or so. It's,
that's tremendous growth in this area. When did you launch the Boston office? We
started this group in May of 2021.
2021. So we're coming up on 2 years. So that's not even 2 years, and you've gone from 0 to 32 in Boston, and I'm sure expanding. It's Southborough, you said, right?
The Southborough team's been around for about 3.5 years. That was started by Frank Grinkowitz, Heidi Cashman. Those two folks started that. It's primarily working with contractors, doing temporary structures, really cool geostructural type work. And our Boston-based team is primarily working with owners, other consultants like yourself, some regulatory agencies, DOT. And
if you could share temporary structures from a geostructural perspective, is that supportive excavation, that's site work? Could you expand on that for the audience?
supportive excavation, trestles, pipe jacking, underpinning, all of those things. It's a really unique group in that, from an engineering perspective, an owner would often get a report from a geotechnical engineer that just says, we recommend your supportive excavation system for your 1 or 2 level or 5 level basement, and it might give some recommendations.
Mm-hmm. And that would be delegated design or something, right?
It won't really have a design to it, but our Metro West team, they actually do the design. So tremendous amount of
that's really powerful to have in-house.
Exactly, value add there, because we can really have better informed decisions on what's the most economical, practical supportive excavation or temporary support, and we bring those folks in as technical experts too.
Before we keep going down the technical and professional path, I want to share a little bit more about how Stan became who he is today. Could you tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up in the Sadkowski household?
Sure. We'll make sure my sisters don't tune in on this one. So I'm the youngest of 3, raised by a single mother and grandmother. So I lived in a house full of all women and just me. So I have 2 older sisters and my mom, my grandmother, and that was our house. It was fantastic, right? Like having 4 moms.
Yeah. You'll develop a high level of emotional intelligence living with all women,
I haven't learned
right?
anything. No, and I have 2 daughters. I have 2 daughters myself. So, yeah, I don't know that engineering was what I always wanted to do. Right? I liked to, solve problems. Right? If I had my druthers, I'd be 5 inches taller, 40 pounds heavier, and play some professional sport, right? That's what we all dreamed about as a kid. That's what we all dreamed about. But
yes,
engineering wise, I think, growing up in my house, we had a lot of autonomy, right? When you're that young, there's a lot of independence, a lot of expectations and responsibility. With single parent household, 3 kids, there's a lot that's expected of you, and that's actually really wonderful. And I unfortunately haven't been able to, force that kind of independence onto my own children. But I think that level of independence and decision making and responsibility is wonderful. I look back at it as like really defining of who I am. And having 2 older sisters to keep a lookout for me, I couldn't ask for anything better. We're very close to this day. So.
That's really special. It seems like you got a sense of accountability and really saw what hard work was from
Absolutely.
that time.
We all had jobs at young ages, right? My sisters and I think we all had full-time summer jobs by the time we were going in from 8th grade to 9th grade. So all of us worked. My mom worked 3 jobs. So we saw work ethic, right? You see what that looks like. You see how hard people have to work.
As I prepared for this conversation with you, Stan, I learned that GeoEngineers is employee owned. Do you know when they became employee owned, and how has that impacted the team, the culture, the company as a whole?
We've been employee owned for probably 40 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So an employee owned, we're not an ESOP. I think that's an important thing.
That is a good distinction. Do you know why, or could you talk about the differences?
Yeah, I can tell you. Well, the difference is that the ESOP, from my understanding, is more of like a retirement plan, right? So the ESOP is an entity that's held in a trust, and you have an ESOP trustee that controls those shares. We don't have that. All the employees control the shares. So there's not a separate entity outside of the company that maintains equity in the firm. Now, for us, the original founders of the company, envisioned a firm that was employee owned, right? That employees had the opportunity to own part of GeoEngineers. And we aren't employee owned where it's just engineers. It's everyone. So technicians, IT, administration, HR, everyone can be an owner at GeoEngineers. The sole requirements are you're a full-time employee, you've been with Geo for at least a year, and you're in good performance standing with the job specifications. So we have, I believe, over 250 owners of a 425, 450 person firm.
I think that's really special and it can be a complete differentiator, and it gives you an edge on how you can attract talent and how committed people are to the success of the company. Do you see, is it often a conversation around the office or the people? Do you see people kind of managing by committee, holding others accountable because they're bought in? Is it a part of the conversation?
It is. It's not part of the daily conversation, but what's really exciting is when the year comes up for someone, right? And then the opportunity to buy shares and to buy into Geo. And you have the conversation, and you present the letter, but it's more than the letter. It's like, hey, we are now partners in this. And I don't know how many people when they're 25, 26 years old recognize the differentiator of that with the firm they're in, right? There's a lot of different ways that ownership is structured in different firms, but in here, right, you can come out of school and after a year you can be an owner of the firm. And you can really see how that drives bottom line, right? There's a collaboration level that's different because everyone knows that your direct input equals output on the backside on what the value of the firm is, and it's unlike a stock that you might buy on the S&P 500 or whatever, because you just, no matter how many iPads I buy for my kids, right, it doesn't really move the needle of Apple stock, right? But with a four-person firm, you're all rowing in the same direction, and you can really see how that drives culture because we are accountable to each other, because at the end of the year we have share price appreciation, we have a dividend on our ownership, and you can see your input directly output, right?
It's the scoreboard, and like you said, rowing in the same direction. That's creating alignment of objectives and goals and understanding how we're going to get there. So powerful. You mentioned another keyword there, that people have the opportunity to buy shares. I think gifting shares, gifting ownership is a very challenging thing to do successfully, because when you gift, it becomes expected. It was like an entitlement. Anytime you're offering equity to a team or giving people an opportunity to buy in or earn equity, so it's either monetary or by achieving some benchmark that allows you to earn shares. It's never, when it's presented as a gift, I think it sends the total wrong message, and it sounds like you guys are doing it exactly right.
That's right. And we have an opportunity where you can buy shares at a discounted rate through like payroll. So if you, similar to how you might defer money towards a 401k, if you say, hey, I want to buy shares through my payroll contributions, that's purchased at a discounted rate too. So you don't pay 100%. So, but it's enticing people to buy and be an owner of the firm, because ownership transition is key to us, right? As a consulting firm, it's you don't want to get there at the end of your retirement and say, I don't have any people to pass on to this wonderful company to. And for us, it's we're solving that ownership transition challenge in real time.
Yeah. At H&O, Jeremiah and I have a vision of a similar future, and we'll absolutely be giving people an opportunity to buy equity and earn equity as we continue to scale here. So learning about companies like GeoEngineers and how you operate helps us, and I'm sure it helps everybody else. The reason, especially in professional services, at the end of the day, the people are the business. They make up the value of the business. It's very hard to transfer ownership successfully in professional services. And I think by giving an opportunity for people to earn equity and buy into equity as we go, it really sets up the next generation of leaders, and it puts them in a position to succeed.
You're spot on. I think, and you see that, much clearer than many others. So yeah.
I put a lot of time into figuring that type of stuff out. I think a lesson I learned early on, a lot of your success has a lot to do with what game you're playing, not how good you are at the game. So I think if you're playing you can be a level 2 talent playing a level 10 game and have amazing success versus being a level 10 talent but playing a level 2 game. You can be the best at the level 2 game, but the level 2 game doesn't really get it done at the end of the day.
Hey,
So to me, understanding the business side and growing organizational value and creating opportunity for other people to succeed became the bigger game that I became focused on. That was like the real powerful message. And I think that lesson, I still don't know everything. And part of this podcast, I get to talk to people like you and learn about your team. I get to learn about everybody that comes on here. I get to learn their perspectives, and it helps us all rise, right? Rising tide raises all ships, right?
yes, I love that saying.
Performance-based bonuses. So in addition to the employee-owned company, you also have performance-based bonuses. Could you tell us about that? Is that discretionary? Is it open? Is it transparent? Do people understand how they're going to be bonused?
That's the hardest part of what we do. I'll be honest. Like, we don't. Not everyone knows what everyone's bonus is. So, I don't know what the person to my left.
That's fair.
Right. So that's quiet. Right. So you don't know what your coworkers' bonuses are. The way the group does it is it's based on. So for Boston, let's just say GeoEngineers is one company. We're a profit center is one profit center. We share resources. We share profitability across the company. So we're not each office is its own profit center. However, we do have target metrics like every group, and we have to, hold ourselves accountable to meeting those metrics. So the way we do bonuses is there's almost like a flat rate, let's say, percentage of salary that everyone would get based on meeting your metrics for your team. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that's very transparent.
Yep. And then there's additional percentage based on individual performance or contribution to that success.
Yeah, which is giving the individual even more focused. I think that's a very healthy performance-based compensation strategy. Right? You have the team on the same page. There's a baseline team goal that allows everybody to get a % of their base compensation as a bonus, and then there's another portion of their potential earning that comes from a performance-based metric.
Right.
What's something you ran into early in your geotechnical career that you totally did not expect to be a part of the job?
Gosh, what is it? I wrestled with this question because so much of what we do is, I never thought I would be doing so much environmental engineering with geotechnical engineering. That to me is the part that adds a wrinkle to my day, right? I never envisioned it because I didn't go to school for it, right? I went to.
Could you help explain the difference between environmental and geotech?
Yeah. So geotechnical, I think in the simplest sense is think about what supports a structure, right? What the soil properties are that support something that sits above it or below it, like a tunnel or a bridge or a building. And environmental engineering is more looking at the chemistry of the soil and groundwater and the air and the impacts it has to human and ecological life. So that's very different. Those are very different things. Now they're intertwined because they're the same media, right? But they're very different. And when you work in Boston and there's an urban environment in the history of historic filling that's happened over time in Boston, we just naturally have challenges in our soil associated with what's in the dirt, right? And what's in the groundwater, in the industrialization of the area, what has been contaminated and how to clean it up and how to mitigate risk for an owner and navigate the regulations so that you can get to an endpoint that makes the most sense geotechnically and environmentally. Because they have to be wed, right? They have to be.
Hey everyone, quick break from the episode. If you're enjoying today's episode, please send this to a friend, like, share, comment, subscribe. It's the only way we're going to help more people. Let's get back to the show. They are almost one and the same, although they're very different skill sets and focus, but they have to do with the dirt. And you talked about Boston being a lot of fill. I think for people outside of the industry and probably even outside of the greater Boston area, if they work only in the suburbs, they might be unaware of the geotechnical challenges people like you and developing in Boston face. Could you share some of the types of, let me reframe, buildings often outside of the city can just sit on the ground because the soil properties are conducive to support a building. So we have to figure out the bearing pressure of the soil and then we can plop a building on it. That's not exactly how it works in Boston all the time. We have other types of support structures, the piles. How deep do those go down? Like if you talk about a building in downtown, Back Bay, Seaport, something that's pile supported, how far down do those go to support a building?
Oh gosh, some of the deepest areas of Boston, you could be 200 feet.
200 feet.
Yeah. And then other parts of, let's say, financial district, Longwood Medical, those types of areas, depending on where you are, it could be 140, 145, because you got to get to the rock, right? You've got to get there, and then you've got to advance your drilled shafts or your load-bearing elements through the rock to build up your capacity. So you can easily be 145 feet down because you need 30 feet of rock socket.
Yeah, so these elements have to hit bedrock, and you're saying the bedrock in these areas could be 130, 120 feet down, sometimes 200 feet down.
Yeah, so 200 feet, I think the deepest areas are, kind of like 180 to 200. It's kind of like South Boston. There's some tricky spots there where things change very quickly, where piles on one side of the site could be 100 feet, and all of a sudden they dip down, they're 175. It's like... Yeah, that variability is just how that's nothing to do with filling. That's just the glacier and the ocean doing its thing.
Wow. And if we talk about the makeup of the soil and the ground above this bedrock that is totally not conducive to support a building, well, like, what is that? What is going on up there that makes it so poor?
Yeah, I mean, what geotechnical engineers love about Boston is this challenge, right? It's the urban fill, which is at the top, overlying oftentimes like marine sediment or softer organic soils that were just deposited over time, whether they're from an estuary or marshland, and then you're underlain by a little bit of sand, which you might think, hey, that's good for bearing, but there's not enough of it. And then what's below that sand is could be 40, 70, 100 feet of Boston blue clay, which, has seen weight, has seen some level of pressure above it from the filling and the glacial process, but it hasn't seen the weight of the buildings and that we're trying to put on it. So if you were to just sit a building, like you said, in the suburbs where you might have even a 10-story building on spread footings, you put that on the urban fill, it's going to go for a ride. If you try to put that and let it bear in the sand, that could also go for a ride because the clay is consolidating. So what you have to do is you have to get through those soils that aren't going to be load-bearing soils, and that's typically the glacial till, which is below the clay, or the bedrock if you don't have a lot of till, or if you're a really heavy building, then you have to go to bedrock.
This is why we say sometimes your biggest risk is in the dirt. Imagine trying to buy a building or buy a piece of property and develop a building not knowing what you're going to run into in the dirt.
I can't, not in Boston, and you don't, the folks that we work with, they know this and they value that component, and often bring folks like you and our team in early, right? Because they understand the structural and the geotechnical are also wed, right? It's like, how are these two things going to interact, and how are we going to get the best building performance for the most economical, outcome? And you just can't. I don't know that you can go into Boston and make a significant purchase of land without understanding what's below you.
Certainly wouldn't advise it, right?
No.
And to your point, you're even talking about across a site or on opposite sides of the street. Even if you know you have to do like a pile supported structure under your building, there's different types of piles, right? The depth of the pile, I imagine, has a significant increase in cost. A pile that goes 60 feet in the ground, it's got to be a little bit cheaper than a pile that goes 140 feet, I imagine, right?
That's right. Yeah, you have concrete, steel, and drill micropiles. They're listed in order of increasing price, and listed in order of typically increasing capacity based on their size.
Mm-hmm. And then the time required to do all that work too. Like time is money. It can extend an entire construction schedule.
Absolutely. And you've worked on projects too where one side of the street, maybe it's a campus type project where multiple buildings are being built over 6, 8, 10, 12 years. One building has one foundation system. The next building has a different one. The next building might have something entirely different. It depends on what you're building and the soil conditions next to it. So it all changes. It's very rarely do you have the same thing over and over again, even in a small neighborhood or city block.
Yeah. I want to share some case studies, and I'll kick one off that we partnered on together. It was 3341 Farnsworth in Seaport. And what that building is, it's a heavy brick masonry building and then heavy timber framing inside. It's two buildings that are kind of married together with a party wall. One's 6 stories, the other's 5 stories. They have different floor heights, but ultimately come up to the same roof elevation. And we did a life science repositioning of this building together, which meant we were adding a lot of mechanical load and we were adding concrete topping to a lot of the wood timber framing. And this building is in Seaport, which, how's the soil in Seaport, Stan?
Challenging.
It is challenging. It is an older building. I believe it was built in the late 1800s, and it's a wood pile supported building. So how do we go about learning, like, what's the capacity of these wood piles and how do we figure out how much load we can add to this building?
Yeah, that was a tricky one. In fact, it's really topical too, because it was just a big event over at that building yesterday, right? I think
it was yesterday.
Yeah. That was a great event too. But so
Stan's referring to the BizNow Life Science event that, like, in the middle of construction, we prepared one floor so that we could have 500 people in an event for people to talk about life science there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, that was packed. And to your point, it's a beautiful building too, right? You're on the 6th floor, and the floor ceiling heights are gorgeous. But how did we start that? I mean, yeah, you brought us in on that project, which we're grateful for the relationship, and that building had historical drawings, which is wonderful. We don't often see historical drawings from a building that old, that's turn of the century, and I'm not meaning this century, but 19th century to 20th century.
That was a huge win.
Huge.
Because we actually knew how many piles were down there.
Yeah. And we always find more because they always, they have a plan that shows how many they wanted to put in. But with timber pile driving, if it doesn't fetch up, what they do is just drive another one right next to it. So if you're ever in a timber pile, wood pile supported building, and you open up the floor and you're expecting to see 3 piles and you see 6, it's because 3 of them didn't fetch up. And now you got to figure out which 3 are good.
Yep. And fetch up means like they don't have any actual strength that we can rely on, right? So, but they don't take those out of the ground. Nope. They just leave them in there.
They just leave them in there. Yep.
Yeah.
So in that building, that's exactly what we did. We evaluated. We cut open the floor and cut up around the columns, and you told us, hey, these are the columns that are going to see the most load increase. Outside bearing walls, interior columns, and we tried to identify what are the typical column layouts and dig down manually, right? When you get into these existing buildings and you're doing repositioning like you're talking about, and value add type of things, this is brute force. So digging a hole is like the worst thing you can do as a human. It is so hard. And these folks will cut open the slab and manually dig a hole and shore it with timber shoring, 14 feet down with cross bracing and everything. So it's a safe excavation, but they're hand digging, putting it in buckets, pulling it up, climbing ladders, and just It's the most manual labor you'll ever see, and these folks are amazing to do it. But eventually, what
Yeah,
they
that's
do is they
digging a hole inside of the building.
inside the building
Inside the building, yeah.
with shovels, right? 14 feet.
Definitely one of the hardest things you'll ever do.
Yeah, imagine doing that. It's 6 by 6 hole in the ground, perfectly vertical sides that are shored, and they expose they're pumping water out at the same time. So you get down, and that's the thing with the timber piles is that where are they with respect to groundwater? Are they submerged? Great. That means it's likely that they're still in good condition because they haven't been exposed to rot and bacteria. Or has the groundwater table dropped due to changes in the environment, changes in the adjacent buildup of properties. And once we get down to those wood piles, we get to visually inspect them. Are they of good integrity? And then we actually load test them in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we did for this job. We load tested the piles, determined the allowable capacity. We back calculate, hey, what's the allowable capacity for the timber piles versus what new demand we're going to put on the building with the add-on of load. And from there, it's, all right, what is our situation for carrying the new load? And for this project that we're talking about, we did drill micropiles because those are can be installed in low headroom clearance. They can drill through obstructions, and they can be readily tied to existing foundation members.
Which was a much needed resolution because we did add significant load. We didn't have to increase the pile capacity around the entire building, but there's certain walls where we did lateral upgrades with shotcrete concrete shear walls on the inside of the brick where we did need to increase the foundation capacity. When we were working on this project early, one of the biggest risks we saw in this project, we knew we were going to be adding load, but we were absolutely relying on the capacity of the existing foundation. And when you're repositioning an existing building, if we're adding load to an existing element, we have a responsibility to verify that it's in good standing condition and capable of supporting the new loads. And that's where Stan came in, because if the water level wasn't at an appropriate height, we risked decay in the top of the timber piles that would compromise its capacity. That was a big risk on the job.
Absolutely.
And for an order of magnitude, let's say we're relying on that, we might have been adding load to well over 1,000 piles on this particular project. That is not a change order you want to get where you have to update the foundation for over 1,000 piles on an existing building when you're hoping that you purchased an asset.
Oh, you're spot on. Could you imagine you get in there and then you don't even know what you have if the piles are even where you thought they were. Like you can't take that level of risk going into that project, because not only is it just straight cost exposure, it's schedule exposure, and then long-term performance of the building, right? It's once you have a tenant moved in, you can't risk any performance issues with your foundations.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. Is once you have a tenant live, especially if you think of a high-cost, high-production industry like life science, the operational loss of a tenant not being able to operate in a building when they said they were going to, say you have to come back and repair something in a building that shuts down their operation for a month, for 2 months, for 6 months, that could be a significant financial and economic risk. Let's go on. And actually, I want to share on 33 and 41 Farnsworth. That's ML Capital. Our partners, Tria was the architect, and Timberline Construction was the contractor. And that is well on its way. The structural upgrades are just about complete, and they're going to be adding in steel roof dunnage for all the new mechanical equipment that's going to be coming in. But it's going to be a really exciting project. Can you share some other? I want some new case studies, something a little bit different. Maybe it's a ground up new development, somewhere we're talking about risk. The reason this conversation with Stan is so important and why we often look to partner with Stan in these types of projects, Stan is very practical when it comes to development planning. You can bring him in and he's really good on that experience and his judgment in helping identify risk without being an alarmist. And I think that's like the most important part of our job early in the development, is to be practical, to identify areas of fee exposure, but also be reasonable in our assessment and to not make every deal impossible to do because we don't want to take any risk.
No, thank you. That's very kind. Again, our focus, right, isn't to turn every project into a science experiment, right, for the sake of just feeling good about things and protecting our insurance, just like we talked about at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It's important, I think, to address the thing that keeps us thinking the way we think, right? Because a client said this to me probably 6 or maybe, it's hard to remember when you start looking at yourself as being a practitioner for 20 years, like the sequence of time, and like, have I really been doing this for 20 years? But let's say 6 or so years ago, or maybe even longer, a client said to us that we look at geotechnical and environmental engineering as a leaky faucet. That's an awful thing to hear, right? Because think about what that means to you, is that you're never giving your client certainty. He wasn't talking about geoengineers in general, but the whole practice, right? Like this practice that we're in. It's saying that they always feel like there's always something else. And so what our approach has always been is to give people the full picture of as much as we can, saying, this is likely what we have. This is the possibility of what we don't know. And we manage that uncertainty through just direct communication, right? But at the same time, giving straight answers. When you ask me what you think the foundation system is going to be, I'm going to tell you what I think it's going to be based on experience. I could be wrong. It happens, right? But I'm going to give you a straight answer. What I'm not going to do is give you the Cheesecake Factory menu of alternatives, right? You know what I mean? You open that menu. It's like
the biggest menu in the world.
Yeah. There's so many things to choose from. That's not helpful, right? That's not helpful to you as a structural engineer trying to figure out what you're going to build. It's not helpful to the owner figuring out how they're going to get a contractor to price it. And it's not helpful to a contractor who's trying to build it. So those are that kind of like why we operate the way we operate was actually from that owner saying that to me, right? And that really resonated because it wasn't a compliment to our industry. And I said, well, maybe that's how they can view other people who practice geotechnical and environmental engineering, but that's not how we are going to practice anymore.
Yeah. And I think it's okay to communicate in that way, even when you're not, if you don't have all the answers or all the variables, it's impossible to be 100% certain, but you can communicate based on experience and knowledge of the system in the area, the likelihood that this is going to be the result. So it is reasonable and responsible to advance our conversation and development decision-making with this understanding, and just know that there's like this 10% fee exposure that we can address through this method, X, Y, or Z.
You stated perfectly. Exactly.
Right. Any other projects stand out that would be a good add to this conversation? Due diligence, deep pile, something a prominent project you're proud of? Love to share some more geotech info with them.
Yeah, I think the projects that I love the most are less about the projects and more about the people and the relationships. Well
said.
So, you love driving by something and knowing that you were part of the team to build it. I always, my kids always wonder why I'm wearing, New Balance sweatshirts and New Balance sneakers, and because everybody thinks that, it's Air Jordans are the thing. And so that always drives me back to the work that I've, just very grateful to be part of the team that built, what is Boston Landing and continue to be Boston Landing in Brighton. But
it's amazing development.
Yeah, it's NB Development Group and New Balance, what they built there. It's amazing. It's just a tremendous change to that part of the city. And you've seen what they've spurred for development in the area. They built a train track, which we got to be part of the train station. And that really spurred further development. What you're seeing with Arsenal Yards and 119 Braintree Street, which just got approval from BPDA maybe a week and a half ago. That whole area has changed because of the vision that the New Balance team had. And that was probably, for me, the projects that I like the most. And to your point, and what we talked about earlier, every single one of those buildings is on something different. that tiny area, you know,
Wow.
they're on, some buildings are on mat foundations, some are on pressure injected footings, which we call PIFs. Nobody else does PIFs
Mm-hmm.
in America, just us.
Just us,
Just us.
as in Boston, or
It's a New England thing. It's a New England thing. Some are on drilled shafts. Some are, have 2 levels of below grade basement with steel sheeting and cross bracing and tiebacks. Some had soldier pile and lagging. Everything over there is a little bit different in that tiny little cluster. In a 14-acre area, you probably have 4 or 5 different foundation systems for all those different structures.
that's a career's worth of experience in one large development.
It exactly is, and that's probably why I love it so much. And it gave me a lot of perspective, and it also opened my eyes up to working with a bunch of different people, because each of those buildings, we had some different teaming partners in each one, and you got to meet a whole lot of new people every time we built a building.
What can we expect from GeoEngineers Boston in the next 5 years? Where are we headed?
Oh boy, I think about that all the time. So where we are now, where we were 2 years ago was a couple of people in 4,000 square feet. We're expanding our offices now. We're 30 people. We're taking on a larger space, which a lot of people are downsizing their space, and we're looking at it like we're better together. We want our team together in the office. We are better together. Let's get together more often. So we're going to expand our space. In 5 years, like, how do I say in this? Trying to formulate my thought here. Our goal hasn't always been, so when people join our team, right, we don't say to them, we want to be the best, right? And that sounds weird, but we say we want to get a little bit better every day. We are never going to achieve perfection, but we want to strive to be the best versions of ourselves. It's an infinite game, is the book, right? Right?
Sure is.
It's an infinite game, and that's how we look at it, saying, because what we don't want to be, say, oh, we're going to be the best. Well, then once you are the best, and how you define that by market share or whatever, are you continuing to learn and push yourself, or are you looking over your shoulder for your competition, right? And so what we're saying is, we are just going to be the best versions of ourselves, and the best way to do that is to just get a little bit better every day. So if you said, what's GeoEngineers in 5 years? We're better than we are today. We're doing, our staff is trained better, our communication is better, our projects are, we have more projects, we have bigger space, we have more people, we're learning more, just better, right? If you say, hey, what does that mean in people? Yeah, I want to be 100 people.
Constant improvement.
I want to be 100 people in five more years. Like, think when we kicked off this journey, we said, hey, in 7 years, so that would be 5 years from now, we want to be 100 people, all right? But I don't want to stop. I don't want that ceiling. I don't want that ceiling to dictate what we code to be.
Yes, it's okay to be bigger than that if that's where life takes you, right?
Yeah.
I agree with that. Setting objectives and goals. I find that I move the goal before we ever get there.
Yeah.
I set a goal, you set an objective, so you can develop a strategy on how you might achieve that objective. And then if things are going well, you generally find like, hey, we're going to be able to beat that objective, so let's move the goalpost, right?
Well, look at your team, right? Did you think you would be? Well, you probably knew this. You and Jeremiah are smart people. You know what you're doing. But did you ever think you were going to be like where you are, right? It's like you look back, you're like, look what we've achieved in such a short amount of time.
It's an interesting conversation. I feel it depends on the day. There's days where you look back and you're like, it's amazing to see how far we've come, and like we're no doubt proud of what we're doing. And then on the other hand, it's like I feel like we could be 5 times bigger and doing more and more. Like I feel like we've underachieved from our capacity, and I think that's like our internal battle as leaders like Jeremiah and I think both my biggest fear is to not live up to my potential. So I'm constantly trying to raise that, right? So for geoengineers, if you're going to grow to 100, that must mean you're hiring. So for any geotechnical engineers out there and people in earth science, geoengineers, you want to talk to them, I imagine, right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Get in touch.
we're always looking for good people.
Do you have a top book or podcast that you'd share with the audience?
So the book that I enjoy most recently, it's It Takes What It Takes.
Haven't heard that one.
Yeah,
It Takes What It Takes.
Yeah, it's the principals here at Geo were given that book by our CEO, and it's a little bit of a mantra that we carry. So when we're out looking for talent, and you say, "Hey, this is a great person in industry. We want this person." Well, what's it going to take to get that person? It takes what it takes, right? Then you actually hear us say that, right? And also when people are talking about the transition from being, let's say, a project manager to a senior project manager, whatever your title is, to being then an associate or principal in a firm. And they say, well, what's the difference there? It's like, well, it's not a 40-hour week. And it's like, well, what does that mean? It doesn't really mean hours. Like at some point in your career, when you're in leadership, it's no longer hours of a day or hours of a week. It takes what it takes.
You own the outcome.
That's right. Yeah.
That's a really good message. It takes what it takes. I think even without reading the book, it's an understanding that you can get behind. Another phrase I like that is a similar mantra is above all hurdles. Right. I look for people who find an excuse for why something got done, not an excuse for why they couldn't.
Yeah.
Like we need to achieve this outcome above all hurdles, and that's well said for anybody in their career, entry level, advancing in their career, project management, and looking to get to that leadership level. It takes what it takes. You got to achieve the outcome. You're the last stop, and you got to figure it out. Best advice you have for emerging leaders?
Oh boy.
It takes what it takes is a good one.
Yeah, I mean, for folks that are emerging leaders, you just have to be persistent. In our world, right, it's easy to get down when you don't win a project or you have a key hire that you want to make and they don't join your team or whatever. You've got to be persistent. Right? In our business, that is the key. And almost persistent to the point where it's relentless. You don't ever stop. And that's what I tell our team. We have key folks. Every organization has this. You just see these folks that are just, the sky is the limit, right? They just have all those key components of communication and motivation and just their ethics and how they treat people and their education. They have all those things, and you foster that, and you just tell them, right, you just take that passion where you go, but you just have to be persistent. And I don't know if that's the best word for it, but that's what I tell our folks. It's like, stay the course is usually what the real words I tell them is just stay the course, be persistent. Don't get knocked down by the challenges or the obstacles.
I honestly think persistent is a perfect summary of a lot of the qualities you brought up today. The continuous improvement, the 1% better every day. It takes what it takes. Persistence. It really embodies, it seems, what the culture is over at GeoEngineers. Stan, I appreciate your partnership, your friendship, everything that you're doing. It's great to see good people like you doing a lot of good things for the industry. So, and thank you for joining the design development community.
Thanks for inviting me. This is really fun.
Hi, everyone. Real quick before you leave for the day, if we could ask one favor, if you enjoyed today's conversation, if you're enjoying all the conversations on design development, please share this with someone that you think will benefit from it. Our goal is to help as many people in the design, development, and construction industries. And with your help, I think we can spread the word and help more people. Thanks for tuning in, and can't wait to hear from you next time.